2 weeks ago, we were all wondering the same thing. Just how good are these Georgia Bulldogs? That question answered emphatically.
Hooker in traffic will be sacked.
First, there was a dominant performance against undefeated Tennessee. Then, a convincing win over Mississippi State. Now, the Bulldogs turn their attention to a different animal, the Wildcat, a menacing and elusive creature that's always ready to pounce.
When you ask our kids what the most physical game they played in, to a man, almost every one of them talks about how physical the Kentucky game was 2 years ago up there and then at our place last year.
As far as Kentucky, well, it's tasked with the borderline impossible, hunting the apex predator. Their foe currently sits atop the college football food chain, and they've been feasting on the Cats for the last 12 years. But Wildcats are animals known for patiently waiting until the perfect time to strike, and it seems they've waited long enough.
I believe in our players. I believe in our team. I still believe it. And nobody's given up, and we do have a very good team.
A chance for Kentucky to prove it's not just a basketball school. To take down a #1 team for the first time since 2007. And for quarterback Will Levis, an opportunity to bounce back. But he'll have to do so against the nation's best defense. A suffocating group that's allowed 300 yards passing only twice over the last 2 seasons. The potential #1 pick opposite the #1 team. The underdogs pitted against the top dogs. It begs the question, is it truly the size of the fight in the dog? Or may it just be the size of the dog in the fight? The answer, Saturday, live on CBS.
And someone who will be on the call for this SEC on CBS Showdown, we have Brad Nessler. Brad, also, you might be a little bit cold out there in Lexington. We were talking about it. It's going to be like in the 30s.
Yeah, that could have an outcome on the game, actually, Jacqueline. If it's as windy as it might be cold, I think that would favor Kentucky and probably take away a little bit of the game for both teams. But yeah, it's going to be more like December weather in Lambeau Field or something than I'm used to anyway.
All right, Brad, let's get into it. So #1 Georgia Bulldogs looking to stay atop the CFP rankings, especially. Now, UGA has won 12 straight against Kentucky. 9 of those are double-digit wins. Brad, do you see a slip-up here happening at all for the Dogs, or do you think they're just going to dominate?
You know, I think, Jacqueline, to think a slip-up or a trap game, it has to be a situation where you either played poorly the week before and then you're anticipating a highly ranked opponent the following week and you get caught in that trap a little bit. Well, Georgia, with the exception of giving up a punt return for a touchdown against Mississippi State, has dominated everybody they played. And, you know, they're going to play Georgia Tech in their season capper, and they'll probably be favored by 5 touchdowns in that game. So, I mean, the way they played against Tennessee, the way they played against Mississippi State, I just don't see that there's a trap or a slip-up in this team, especially the way Kirby Smart coaches them. You know, we did the Tennessee game you're showing right now, and that was total domination. And I expected if there was going to be a slip-up, it would have been last week.
All right, talking about Kentucky coming off, I mean, just a shocking loss to Vandy, handing Vandy their first SEC win since 2019. Now, regardless, Brad, the Wildcats defense putting up great numbers, holding 13 of the past 14 opponents to under 25 points. But it's going to be a little tough to do that against this Georgia team, Brad.
Yeah, the bad news for that 13 out of 14, the 13th one, or the 1-1, was Tennessee, and that was 44 points, you know, and they've dominated this Kentucky series. I agree with Kirby in the preview that you did there. This is a team that always plays Georgia, really physical football. You know, they want to run the ball with Chris Rodriguez. That's probably their hope right now, is that they can hang with Georgia that way and maybe time it possession-wise. But coming off the Vanderbilt loss it's not a good look. It's not a good thing for Mark Stoops. It's not a good thing for Kentucky football fans. You know, that should never have happened, really. And right now their defense is hanging in there. Number 3 in scoring defense, overall defense in the SEC, and number 2 in pass defense. But they have a little trouble when people get down in the red zone. They don't have a great tendency to stop people. And when you add that to their offensive numbers, just doesn't add up really well, the Wildcats on Saturday.
Now the Wildcats, their quarterback, Will Levis, some are saying that he's one of the top QBs available in next year's draft. He's number 6 on our Ryan Wilson's latest mock draft. Now the Wildcats have they've had an underwhelming season. They're now 6-4. Now, Brad, if Levis puts up some big numbers against UGA, how much could that change his draft position?
That would really help him, Jacqueline, and help him a lot. And he needs help right now because he played terribly against Tennessee, 3 interceptions in that game. He bounced back, a little bit against Mississippi for 179 yards and 3 touchdowns. So that was an improvement. But then when you come back, what happened against Vanderbilt, he was under 50% passing the football and, didn't even get to 100 yards throwing, or just a little over 100 yards throwing, and another interception. So I'm not one of those guys that knows all that much. And, he fits the bill size-wise, arm strength-wise, all of that. I like the kid. If you just look at him, you go, he's an NFL quarterback. The way he's played in the last 3 weeks or 3 of the last 4 weeks, not an NFL quarterback. So, yeah, if he could have a great game against the number 1 team in the country and the number 1 defense, his stock would go right back up. But he's had kind of a rough month. You got to remember, first 6 games of the season, his numbers were really good. But 2 of his biggest games were against MAC opponents. And as soon as the competition got better, his numbers got worse. So a big game for him and his future on Saturday.
Now the quarterback on the other side, Stetson Bennett, thrown 2+ passing touchdowns in 3 straight games. Now, Brad, how confident are you that Stetson Bennett is just going to keep that momentum going against UK?
He's taken more shots down recently, and I think that's why some of his interception numbers have jumped up a little bit. And, I have a lot of friends that are Georgia fans, and they get nervous every time he throws the ball. I said, man, he's almost got 3,000 yards passing, and, he does so many things well. He and Ladd McConkey have hooked up better than they did earlier in the season. Brock Bowers is still his favorite target. But some of the downfield throws now are starting to click. And, by going downfield more often, you're going to have a tendency to probably have more interceptions. He's a little bit of a gunslinger. Kirby Smart says he's stubborn at times, but he loves them, especially the things he can do also with his legs. He's tied for the team lead in rushing touchdowns with 7. His numbers are comparable to the season. The interceptions are up a little bit, like I said, but I think he's playing really, really well right now. And, I don't see him slipping too much over the course of the next 2 regular season games and into the SEC championship and the playoffs. I've been a fan of his for 3 years. I'm not giving up on him now. That's for sure.
And Georgia, of course, the heavy favorite here at -2.5, over under at 49.5. Brad, exactly how do you think things are going to shake out in Lexington?
Well, I think Kentucky will hang in at the beginning because I think is solid enough that they're going to make a game of it. Last year they went on a long drive in the 4th quarter that lasted almost the whole 4th quarter. They'd like to play that way. Put it in Chris Rodriguez's hands, see what he can do against the Georgia defense. 2 years ago, he had over 100 yards. Last year, the problem is he had 7 yards on 7 carries. So he knew what he was up against the number 1 Georgia defense last year. If they can just possess the ball, keep it out of Stetson Bennett's hands, and go on long scoring drives, at least to come up with any kind of points, I think Kentucky hangs early. I think Georgia pulls away in the second half, and I don't think it'll be that close in the second half.
All right, that is Brad Nessler giving us his preview of Georgia, Kentucky. Brad, thank you so much, and stay warm in Lexington.
Gonna try, Jacqueline. Thanks for the warning.
All right, and you can watch the action. Number 1 Georgia against UK on CBS as 3:30 p.m. Eastern. UGA has won the last 12 games against Kentucky. That is the longest streak in series history.
All right, well, coming up next, it is a big game, so there will be big wagers. We're going to talk to Chip Patterson and Barrett Sallee about our SEC Game of the Week and how to wager on it next. All right, for more on their thoughts on how to wager this game, let's bring in our dynamic duo from the Cover 3 podcast, so Chip Patterson and Barrett Sallee. You see the way the numbers are leaning, Chip. Give us your play on that line, which is now over 3 touchdowns to the Bulldogs.
Lay 'em.
We are going to lay every single one of those points. And if you want to get really sick with it, there's a soccer bet, halftime, full-time. I would not be surprised if Kentucky is able to keep this tight early, but I fear that later in the game, after a cold and frigid start, that the Bulldogs are going to get warmed up and that they might pour on the points, because that is one thing that we have seen from this Georgia team, that while it has been a team that has been a little bit slow starting, once they get rolling, they do not stop. And so the against the spread number, there is just not many numbers where I will take Kentucky, even playing at home. I think that Stetson Bennett and the Bulldogs offense might get a little tight early, much like it was last year against Kentucky, but eventually that dam is going to break and the Bulldogs are going to pour on the points. I will lay the points with the Dogs.
Yeah, Chip, I'm going to lay the points as well. Everything you said is absolutely correct. And part of this is on Kentucky. Chris Rodriguez comes back as a star running back, and he absolutely tears it up. But at the same time, Will Levis's stock goes way down. This Kentucky team is not balanced, and it hasn't been balanced all year. And now their running game's okay, but their passing game is terrible. So how are they going to actually move the ball against this Georgia defense? The answer is they're not. And so, yeah, like you said, might be frigid early. Georgia likes to come out and jab, jab, jab before it throws those hooks and crosses. And I think that might happen in this game. But when they get rolling, you're right, Chip, they don't stop. And I think in this game, Kirby Smart's going to keep his foot on the gas more than maybe a lot of us think, because they still haven't figured out who their go-to receiver is. I guess Ladd McConkey has been it so far, but of their top 4 receivers, he's the only one that's a true wide receiver. They've got to find that guy. It's not Kearis Jackson. They've tried to make him be that guy all year, and he hasn't really done it yet. It's not Marcus Rosemy St. Jacques, because he hasn't done it either. They need A.D. Mitchell to come back, but A.D. Mitchell has been fighting that ankle injury. So I think for Georgia, they're going to continue to try some things offensively deep downfield, and as a result, you're going to see, I think, Georgia cover in a big way in the second half.
Yeah, and you saw 25 straight regular season wins, part of that 10 straight true road wins, a streak which started in 2020 against Kentucky. So in terms of the total here, Barrett, 49.5, you going over or under?
Oh, I'm going over. I mean, Georgia might do that by themselves. And if they don't, I mean, factor Kentucky in for maybe 7 or 10 on the backside in the fourth quarter. But, I mean, I truly believe the way this is going, you could take a team total of Georgia over 49 and a hook, and you will probably win. Like I said, I just think they're going to keep their foot on the gas. They want to get Stetson Bennett some love for the Heisman Trophy. Kirby Smart knows about that. He knows how much of a recruiting tool it is to send a quarterback to New York, because that brings everybody else, not only high schoolers, but transfers over to try to do the same thing. And Stetson Bennett is sort of on that periphery too. So I think the combination of Georgia trying to establish more of a deep threat downfield, coupled with Stetson Bennett maybe, kind of lurking on the fringe of the Heisman Trophy debate, would get them, I think, as a team over 49.5, much less when you add Kentucky's points in.
Barrett, while I am filled with glee to hear you suggest that an alternate line team total over on the Bulldogs playing out at plus juice on 49.5 might be worth a sprinkle, I'm going to go with the under. I don't know how many points Kentucky's going to score in this game, and I do think that there will be a little bit of a slow start, and this is a game that I do think Mark Stoops just doesn't want to get embarrassed. He is having to defend his football program, which, on a side note, is ridiculous. This is one of the greatest stretches of Kentucky football that we have had in a very long time, but I think that this Kentucky team is going to try to play keep away from Stetson Bennett and Georgia. They're going to try to put together long drives. They're going to let that clock go tick, 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 tick. And that plus the combination of just not being able to punch it into the end zone, not being able to get touchdowns, I see this one going under the total.
All right, let's talk about the SEC title game, which has Georgia taking on LSU. Caesars is not posting numbers yet, but if you go offshore, Georgia's getting, they're minus 16. So, I mean, Chip, when you look at that, do you think that's a fair reflection of where those two teams are at?
It's a little bit surprising. Barrett and I talked about this here on CBS Sports HQ last week, and he was correct. I thought it would be under 14. He had it closer to 17. So kudos to Barrett on that. As I referenced that, I think it's a little bit high just because this is an LSU team that I do think is very strong defensively, and I think that they've done an incredible job under Matt House of really being able to unlock the playmakers that they have, especially within that front seven. You know, the emergence that we've seen of Harold Perkins as one of not just the SEC's, but college football's true superstars. I think that this LSU defense would be able to provide enough resistance that this is not going to be a blowout. So while I still have time to get the last data points in and run the Chipalytics before we do our official picks here on CBS Sports HQ, I might lean towards the underdog in this spot.
Not just a hat rack, my friend. There's not much hair up there, but it's not just a hat rack. But yeah, I mean, I think it's about right. I think when you look at the way LSU has progressed under Jaden Daniels, the offense has gotten a lot more balanced, and I think there's still time for Brian Kelly to tweak it a little bit, but there's not much time. So I think 16's about right. If I had to pick right now, I'd probably go with Georgia, but it kind of depends on how they look the last couple of weeks, and I think more importantly, does last week's sort of hangover for LSU become a trend? I don't think it will, but if it does, then maybe you pound it a little more with Georgia.
The SEC title game coming up December 3rd at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS. Chip Patterson, Barrett Sallee joining us to discuss Georgia at Kentucky, our SEC game of the week on CBS. And for more on this game and other big games this weekend, be sure you're tuning into the Cover 3 podcast. Chip, Barrett, and Tom Fornelli. Latest episode, a reaction to Tuesday's latest college football playoff rankings. Download and follow the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get your podcast audio.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.